Have you ever been so certain about something, so convinced that the world had already shown you every truth there was, only to realize one day that you had been wrong all along? It is an uncomfortable feeling, almost like standing in front of a mirror and seeing a stranger staring back. And yet, that is exactly what happens when a belief is challenged, not by logic, not by argument, but by a human being who walks into your life quietly, unexpectedly, and changes everything without even trying. That is how this story begins, with a belief that love was a fairy tale, and a woman who promised herself she would never fall for it again. There is a kind of silent insult that sits heavily in many hearts, especially in people who have been wounded by life. It whispers things like, "Love is just a transaction," or "No one stays forever," or "Happiness is never meant for people like you." And when this whisper becomes familiar, it starts to feel like truth. For Nadia, a 34-year-old Russian woman from St. Petersburg, it became her entire worldview. She didn't speak about it often, but she carried it like a small shadow behind her, following her from one failed relationship to another, from one disappointment to the next. She told her friends she was fine. She told herself she was fine. But deep down, she had already given up. And here is the strange thing. Across the world, in conversations she never knew about, in countries she had never visited, there were people echoing that same belief. It's as if the whole world had silently agreed that true love, pure, loyal, unconditional, was something of the past. A myth for songs and movies. Not something you meet in the real world. Even one of Harvard's most respected relationship researchers once said during a lecture, "Real love is almost impossible now. People don't commit, people don't sacrifice anymore." Nadia heard that quote once on a video clip and nodded. She didn't question it. Why would she? Everything in her life seemed to confirm it. But what if I told you that just months later, even he would have had to admit he was wrong? What if I told you that the place with the answer wasn't Paris, or New York, or Moscow, but a nation thousands of miles away, a nation many underestimate until they step into its warmth? What if I told you that a man from this nation, gentle, patient, ordinary in the most extraordinary way, would rewrite everything Nadia believed? Before we get there, let me take you back to who she was. Nadia grew up in a family where emotions were strong but often hidden. Her parents divorced when she was just 8, and she remembered her mother saying one sentence that shaped the way she saw relationships forever. People love until it becomes inconvenient. Nadia took that to heart. She built walls around herself. She dated, she tried, but every time things became difficult, she withdrew first, assuming the other person would eventually leave anyway. By the time she reached her 30s, she had stopped trying altogether. One winter evening, after a long day at work, she found herself scrolling on her phone, not looking for anything specific, just filling the silence. That was when she stumbled across a story, a simple post from a Filipino nurse working in Russia, talking about kindness, about faith, about family, and about how her Filipino husband still held her hand every night before they went to sleep. It was nothing dramatic. No movie scene romance. But for some reason, Nadia paused. Something in that story felt different. And maybe that was the first crack in her wall, even though she didn't realize it yet. She read comments under the post. Russians, Americans, Koreans, Europeans, all talking about their Filipino partners, about loyalty, about warmth, about a type of love that felt old-fashioned, almost sacred. Nadia frowned. Could that be real? Or was it just the internet exaggerating again? She closed the app and shook her head, but the thought lingered like a quiet echo. A few days later, she met someone at an international language exchange group, a Filipino man named Elias. He was not flashy, not loud, not trying to impress anyone. He simply smiled, introduced himself, and asked her how her day was going. And it was that smile, calm, sincere, steady, that made her blink for a second longer than she expected. But she brushed it off. She told herself it meant nothing. Yet, what she didn't know was this. The Philippines was already entering her life, little by little, not with fireworks but with warmth, not with grand gestures but with sincerity. And that warmth was about to melt a belief she had held onto for far too long. Nadia didn't fall easily into conversations with strangers, especially men. She had grown accustomed to guarded exchanges, polite distances, and the kind of small talk that evaporates the moment a door closes. But something about Elias unsettled her rhythms, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, disarming way that felt almost unfair. He listened, really listened. And for someone who had spent her life feeling unheard, that alone was confusing enough to stir discomfort. She found herself replaying their brief conversation during her train ride home, wondering why it mattered when she desperately wanted it not to. But before we speak of Elias, you need to understand the weight Nadia carried before that moment, the shadows she lived with. Her story, like many, had chapters she rarely revealed. Years earlier, when her mother became ill, Nadia spent months fighting a healthcare system that seemed indifferent to suffering. Endless lines, emotionless doctors, the coldness of bureaucracy. She still remembered the night she broke down in the hallway of the hospital, exhausted, hungry, helpless. Her mother survived, but something inside Nadia didn't. Something about trust in people, trust in goodness, trust in love. It all slowly faded. And then came the economic crisis, when she lost her job and spent nearly a year jumping between freelance work and odd part-time shifts. There were nights she went to bed without dinner, days she pretended she wasn't hungry. She didn't talk about it. That kind of vulnerability had no place in her world. You survive. You move on. You don't expect help from anyone. That was her rule. It didn't help that her relationships mirrored the same pattern. Partners who left when things became hard, conversations that turned cold, promises that dissolved into silence. She tried dating apps. They only made her feel more disposable. She tried meeting people through friends. It left her with stories of disappointment. She even considered moving to Europe for a fresh start. But the loneliness followed her there too. No matter where she went, no matter who she met, the result was the same. People cared only when it was easy. So when she met Elias, even though the conversation was brief, a part of her mind whispered the same familiar warning. Don't trust it. Don't hope. Don't believe. Yet life has a way of nudging us towards the unexpected. A week after their first meeting, Nadia ran into Elias again at a coffee shop near her office. This time he was sitting alone, reading something on his phone with a soft smile on his face. She tried to walk past without being noticed, but he looked up at the exact moment she passed by and called her name. She didn't even realize he remembered it. Their second conversation was longer, light, natural. And when she asked him what he was reading, he said he was checking on news from home, the Philippines. He showed her photos of his family, of their small church in Cavite, of his mother who woke up at dawn every Sunday to prepare food for their neighbors, even the ones she barely knew. There was something warm in the way he spoke about family, something profoundly sincere in the way he described ordinary moments. His father fixing the gate, his sisters laughing in the kitchen, his community gathering during storms to help each other. It all felt too good, too harmonious, too far from the world she knew. She didn't say much. She just listened. But inside her, a strange question surfaced. How could people thousands of miles away live with so much kindness when she struggled to find even a single drop of it in her own world? Over the following weeks, her life continued as usual. Work, cold mornings, quiet evenings. But something began to shift. A faint sensation, subtle but undeniable, like the first signs of spring hidden beneath snow. She began noticing Filipino workers at her office who were always smiling despite heavy workloads. She started recognizing Filipino families at church. Simple, humble, praying together with a devotion she rarely saw in her own community. She overheard Tagalog phrases filled with warmth, with humor, with affection. It made her curious. It made her uneasy. It made her rethink things she thought she already understood. But curiosity alone wasn't enough to break years of fear and distrust. That would take something more, something unexpected. One evening, after a particularly tiring day, Nadia received a message from an acquaintance, an invitation to a small international gathering hosted by a Filipino community center. At first, she intended to ignore it. Crowds weren't her thing. But her eyes lingered on the invitation longer than she expected. A small voice inside whispered, "What if?" And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she went. It was there, in a modest room filled with laughter, music, and the unmistakable smell of Filipino home cooking, that Nadia felt something she hadn't felt in years: belonging. The warmth was unmistakable. The hospitality was overwhelming in its simplicity. She wasn't questioned, judged, or evaluated. She was welcomed, just as she was. And among the familiar faces she scanned across the room, she saw him again. Elias, smiling as if he had been waiting for her all along. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this gentle enter, Nadia didn't expect the moment to stay with her, but it did. The way the room felt warmer than any winter jacket she had ever owned. The way people who barely knew her offered her food as if she had been part of their family for years. The way laughter filled the air without hesitation, without restraint, without fear. In Russia, laughter was something earned. You had to break through someone's guard before you heard their joy. But here, with these people, joy was the starting point. Elias approached her with a plate in his hand, insisting she try a dish she had never heard of. Pancit, he called it. Simple noodles, nothing extraordinary. Yet, as she tasted it, she realized it wasn't the food that mattered. It was the intention, the gesture, the unspoken message. You are welcome here. You are safe here. It confused her. It softened something inside her she wasn't ready to acknowledge. As the evening unfolded, she found herself drawn into conversations with Filipinos from different walks of life. Students, caregivers, engineers, teachers, all sharing stories about their families back home, about how much they missed the Philippines, but how proud they were to carry its spirit wherever they went. They talked about faith in a way that wasn't preachy but sincere. They talked about community in a way that made her wonder why such unity felt rare everywhere else. That night, as she walked home through the cold streets of St. Petersburg, she felt a strange warmth she couldn't explain. A quiet thought whispered inside her. If people like this come from the Philippines, what must the Philippines itself be like? The days that followed brought even more unexpected turns. She found herself visiting the Filipino Center more often, sometimes for events, sometimes just to watch. She didn't always talk much, but she absorbed everything. The warmth, the humor, the effortless generosity. And in the middle of it all, there was Elias. He didn't chase her. He didn't overwhelm her. He simply existed in her space like a comforting presence, always respectful, always patient, always gentle. It was his gentleness that caught her off guard the most. She had been taught that men who were gentle had hidden motives, agendas, or insecurities. But with him, it felt different. Like his kindness came from somewhere deeper, somewhere spiritual, somewhere shaped by a culture she was beginning to admire more than she admitted. One evening, as they sat outside the center waiting for an event to begin, she asked him a question that had been circling her mind for weeks. "Why are Filipinos like this?" she asked softly. "Kind, warm, caring. Where does it come from?" Elias thought for a moment, then smiled with that humble expression she had come to recognize. "It comes from home," he said. "From how we were raised, from how we see suffering, from faith. When you grow up in a place that doesn't always give you everything, you learn to give what you can. Love becomes something you practice, not something you wait for." Those words stayed with her. Love you practice, not wait for. It was the opposite of everything she had lived. In her world, love was conditional, earned, negotiated, rare. But in his world, in their world, love seemed to flow from a deeper well. Weeks turned into months, and Nadia found herself drawn even closer to Elias. Not because he pursued her with intensity, but because he didn't. He simply showed up, consistently, sincerely, with a heart that felt impossibly steady. He remembered small things she said. He checked in on her without intruding. He prayed silently before meals, and somehow that simple act touched her more than elaborate gestures ever had. And then something happened that shifted everything. One evening, Elias told her he had to return to the Philippines for a family matter. Nothing serious, but important. Nadia felt a wave of something she didn't expect. Fear. Not fear that he would disappear, but fear that she had finally found something real, only to lose it before she could understand it. She didn't tell him that. She simply nodded, wished him a safe trip, and went home. But as she lay in bed that night, she realized the truth she had been avoiding. Meeting him had awakened something she thought was long dead. Hope. Before he left, Elias invited her to visit the Philippines one day. "Not now," he said gently, "but when your heart is ready, when you want to see where warmth comes from." It was said lightly, almost as a joke, but to her it felt like an invitation into another world. A month passed. Elias kept in touch, sending photos of his family, of the beaches, of the churches decorated for local festas. The images stirred something inside her: curiosity, longing, wonder. And one morning, without fully understanding why, she booked a flight. She stood in the airport holding her passport, her heart racing. Her mind filled with questions she didn't have answers to. But she took a breath, stepped forward, and crossed the threshold into a journey that would change far more than she expected. What she didn't know yet was that the Philippines wasn't just a place she would visit. It was a place that would change her definition of home and love forever. When the plane door opened and the first wave of humid Manila air touched her skin, Nadia felt something she had never experienced before. A warmth that felt almost alive. It was not just the temperature. It was the sensation of stepping into a place that seemed to breathe with its own heartbeat. People moved around her with ease, smiling, greeting each other, calling out names with affection. Even the airport staff, tired from long shifts, still greeted passengers with a sincerity she rarely saw in the West. It felt like she had stepped into a world that had decided long ago to carry joy, even through hardship. Elias waved at her from outside the arrivals gate, his smile exactly as she remembered. Calm, steady, sincere. And in that moment, something in her chest softened, almost melted. She had been nervous about seeing him again, afraid the distance would reveal her feelings too clearly. But when he held out his hand to take her luggage, when he asked her if she was tired or hungry, when he said "Welcome to the Philippines" with a gentle pride in his voice, the fear slipped away. It felt right. As they drove through the city, she watched everything with the wide-eyed awe of a child seeing the world for the first time. The jeepneys painted like moving murals, the street vendors laughing as they arranged fruit, the families crossing the streets holding hands as if they were one unit. There was chaos, yes, but a kind of organized chaos that somehow made sense. Life here wasn't quiet, but it was alive. Elias took her to his family's home in Cavite, a modest house with a small garden and a rosary hanging by the doorway. The moment she stepped inside, his mother embraced her without hesitation, as if welcoming a long-lost daughter. His father shook her hand firmly, his eyes kind. His sisters giggled softly and teased their brother in Tagalog, which made everyone laugh, even Nadia, despite not understanding a word. She was given a seat at the dining table piled high with dishes she didn't recognize: adobo, sinigang, lumpia, bibingka. She tried each one, and each bite tasted like something wrapped in love. But what moved her more than the food was the way the family interacted. They prayed together, they listened to each other, they laughed easily, and they included her in the conversation even when they switched languages. Their home felt like a living embrace. She didn't know the last time she had felt something like that. The days that followed unfolded with a kind of gentle magic she hadn't expected. Elias showed her the beaches of Batangas, where fishermen waved at strangers as if greeting old friends. He took her to a church in Tagaytay, where she watched families pray with a devotion that brought a quiet ache to her chest. He introduced her to neighbors who offered fruit, bread, stories, anything they had, with a generosity so natural it made her eyes sting. Everywhere she went, she felt the same tenderness, the same sincerity, the same unspoken message: you are welcome here, even if we do not know your story. It was during a visit to a small barangay chapel, barely lit except for a few candles, where she felt the first true break inside her. She saw a mother kneeling with her child beside her, their hands clasped, their eyes closed in prayer. They had so little, their clothes worn, their slippers old, yet the peace in their faces was something she had never experienced in her wealthier world. She felt something rise in her throat, a pressure she had tried to suppress for years. And when Elias placed a small candle in her hand and whispered, "You don't need to believe in anything specific. Just breathe, just feel," she couldn't hold back anymore. She cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but in soft, trembling tears that carried years of loneliness, disappointment, and silent wounds. Elias didn't say a word. He simply stayed beside her, his presence steady, his hand gently resting near hers without forcing closeness. And in that silence, she felt something she had never felt before. Not romance, not infatuation, but love in its purest form. Love expressed through patience. That night, as they walked outside under the soft glow of streetlights, Nadia whispered something she once believed she would never say. "I feel safe here. I feel like I can breathe again." Elias looked at her quietly, and she saw emotion flicker in his eyes. Not pride, not expectation, but gratitude. "That is what home is supposed to feel like," he said. And she realized that the Philippines wasn't just changing how she saw Elias. It was changing how she saw life itself. The faith she saw in its people, the resilience she witnessed in their smiles, the compassion that seemed woven into the very rhythm of the culture. It was giving her back something life had taken away. Hope, pure, simple, unconditional. She knew, standing there in the Filipino night air, that she had arrived expecting to observe a culture, but instead, she had found the missing pieces of herself. In the days that followed, something inside Nadia began to settle, like a storm finally calming after years of restless waves. She found herself waking each morning to the sound of roosters crowing, to the scent of warm rice steaming in the kitchen, to the soft laughter of Elias's sisters as they prepared for the day. These simple sounds, these ordinary moments, wrapped her like a blanket she didn't know she needed. She felt herself letting go of old fears without even realizing it. One afternoon, she sat on a wooden bench outside the house, watching neighborhood children run barefoot on the dusty road, playing games that felt timeless. Their joy wasn't bought or manufactured. It was born from each other, from community, from the simple thrill of movement. One of the mothers, carrying a baby on her hip, waved at Nadia with the kind of warmth she had rarely seen back home. And in return, Nadia felt a genuine smile rise on her face, the kind that came not from politeness, but from her heart. Elias sat down beside her, handing her a cold drink, and she looked at him with a quiet curiosity. "How do people here stay so warm?" she asked softly. "Even when life is so hard." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched the same children she was watching, the dust rising around their feet as they laughed without restraint. Then he turned to her and said, "Because we don't measure life by what we have. We measure it by who we have." Those words landed gently, but deeply. She thought back to her life in Russia, the crowded metro, the silent streets, the cold apartments where neighbors barely greeted each other. She remembered the loneliness she carried even on days filled with people. She remembered the exhaustion of pretending she was fine. But here, surrounded by a community that embraced her without hesitation, she realized something profound. Love wasn't supposed to be a reward. It was supposed to be a way of living. That evening, Elias's mother asked her to help prepare dinner. Nadia found herself chopping vegetables, listening to stories told with laughter and warmth. At one point, his mother placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "You seem lighter now, happier. I don't know why, but God brings people to the Philippines for reasons we don't always understand." It was said so simply, so sincerely, that Nadia felt her eyes sting with emotion. Later, after dinner, as the household grew quiet and the night wrapped the village in a gentle darkness, Nadia stepped outside. She looked up at the sky, a sky clearer than the one she had at home, dotted with stars she hadn't seen in years. And in that soft quiet, she began to speak to herself in a way she had never dared before. This place, it healed something in me. And she knew it was true. The Philippines had done something no therapy session, no book, no relationship ever had. It had rebuilt her faith in people. It had taught her that compassion didn't need to be complicated. It had shown her that resilience didn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply smiled in the face of hardship. It had proven that love still existed, not just the romantic kind, but the everyday kind, the kind that is baked into the soul of a community. When she turned around, she found Elias standing in the doorway, his gaze gentle, his presence steady as always. She walked toward him, her steps soft, her heart full. When she reached him, she whispered something she had held inside for far too long. "I thought true love was a fairy tale. I thought people only cared when it was convenient. But this country, your people, you, have shown me something different." He didn't respond with dramatic words or grand gestures. He simply reached for her hand, slowly, respectfully, and said, "Love is real. Sometimes you just have to come very far to find it." Her fingers tightened around his, not from fear, but from certainty. In the weeks that followed, her return to Russia felt different. Not because the country changed, but because she did. The cold felt less harsh. The loneliness felt less heavy. She carried the Philippines with her, in the way she moved, in the way she listened, in the way she opened herself to the world again. She found herself offering kindness more freely, speaking with more patience, loving without expecting anything in return. Because she had learned that love, at its core, is an act of courage. And when people asked her about her trip, she didn't speak first about beaches or food or scenery. She spoke about hearts, about the people whose warmth stitched her back together, about the faith that had given her strength, about a man whose gentleness broke through walls she thought were permanent. And with quiet pride, she would say, "The Philippines didn't just show me a different culture, it showed me a different kind of humanity." And that, at its core, is the message that lingers long after her story ends. A message for every Filipino watching, for every foreign viewer searching for hope, for every person who has ever doubted love. In a world growing colder, the Philippines stands as proof that warmth still exists. In a world that rushes, the Philippines teaches us to slow down and care. In a world full of broken hearts, the Philippines reminds us that healing is possible. And in a world where many believe true love has disappeared, the Philippines quietly whispers, "It never left. It was just waiting for you to find it."